Thank you for joining us for the seminar on the current politics in Israel and Turkey. My name is Ayça Alemdaroğlu. I'm the Associate Director on the Program on Turkey at the Center on Democracy, Development, and the Rule of Law. Today, we're privileged to have a scholar whose extensive research and contributions really enrichen our understanding of the history and politics in the Middle East. I'm delighted to introduce Dr. Louis Fishman. Dr. Fishman serves as an associate professor of history at Brooklyn College at the City University of New York. He's the author of Jews and Palestinians in the Late Ottoman Era, 1908-1914, Claiming the Homeland, from Edinburgh University Press in 2020. His book offers deep insights into late Ottoman Palestine, the Jews of the Ottoman Empire, and the layers of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. And he gave a brilliant talk yesterday on the other side of the Encina Hall in the Abbasi program in Islamic Studies on this book. His contributions are not restricted to the realm of academia. He has many hats. He is a prolific contributor to the Israeli newspaper Haaretz. Through this platform, he critically examines Turkish and Israeli politics. Furthermore, he provides political commentary to various international media and political outlets, policy outlets, amplifying his voice and influence on a global scale. A truly global citizen, Dr. Fishman divides his time between New York, Istanbul, and Tel Aviv, drawing experiences and insights from each of these vibrant cities, weaving them into his work. The seminar today is presented in cooperation with visiting fellows in Israeli Studies program at the Freeman Spalding Institute in International Studies. I would like to thank my colleague Kate Krumnitzka for putting all this event together. And I also want to thank Tov Center for Jewish Studies, the Abbasi Program in Islamic Studies, the Mediterranean Studies Forum, and Stanford's Department of History. All these partners make Louis' visit possible and fruitful, hopefully. So the long list of our campus partners is a testimony to the breadth of Dr. Fishman's research. Today, we will discuss domestic politics, in particular polarization in Israel and Turkey, and their importance for global democracy and regional security. Before giving the microphone to him, I want to state our house rules. Please, I will be moderating the discussion, Q&A. Please indicate if you have a question. Please indicate to me. I'll be making a list of people, and then we'll follow that list during the Q&A. So please join me in giving a warm welcome to Dr. Louis.
Well, thanks so much for everyone coming, and thanks, Ayça, for such a nice introduction. I'm humbled by it very much so. Today, not like yesterday, I'm not doing a PowerPoint. I'm actually reading from the paper. So it's about a 25-minute talk, hopefully not more than that. If I see your head start nodding, then I'll know to start moving faster. Yes. So the talk is Polarized Democracy, a place for Israel and Turkey. While the AKP party has made attempt, this is page 10. I was like, there's something, and it's two-sided. Okay, good that I know this. Exactly, perfect. So let me start over. Sorry about this. I don't want to confuse others. I think that's not my opening statement, I'm pretty sure. Perfect, great. Very good. Take two. Polarized Democracy, a place for Israel and Turkey. Every Saturday night for 38 weeks, hundreds of thousands of Israelis have flooded the streets of Tel Aviv and major highway junctions throughout the country to protest the judicial reforms proposed by Benjamin Netanyahu's government. Better known as a judicial coup, the protesters claim that the Israeli government made up of a secular, religious, ultra-nationalist coalition, is dead set on taking power away from the courts. This would give the government a free hand in administrative and legislative matters, ultimately ending the country's democratic nature. These protests are an extension of those that began during Israel's electoral crisis, which has led the country into a political stalemate in 5 elections in the last 4 years. The electoral crisis results from a division centered not on whether someone is on the right or left of the political spectrum, but rather if someone is pro or anti Netanyahu. Thus, the Israeli center and left are joined by numerous former Likud party members and former government ministers from the Likud, uniting over their anti-Netanyahu sentiments. On the flip side, a motley crew of secular liberal current and Likud members who find themselves now with the neo-fascist Itamar Ben-Gvir and the religious Haredim, known to some as the Sephardic and Ashkenazi ultra-Orthodox, all support Netanyahu out of ideology or sheer party interest and unite in their disdain of the Israeli High Court. For them, the judicial reform is correcting the injustice masterminded by a political and judicial elite who are hell-bent on blocking the people's will. By giving power to the Knesset, they, the Likud and their partners, believe that the people's voice will be heard for the first time in all of Israeli history. One does not need to have a great imagination to see similarities with the situation in Turkey, which is polarized to the core over its president, Recep Tayyip Erdogan. Last June, Erdogan won his 6th election in a contest that was his most challenging yet. By transitioning the country from a parliamentary system to a presidential one in the post-2018 elections, which was the culmination of years of usurping more powers, Erdogan and his close allies have successfully taken control of the state's reins, leaving the parliament and the courts subordinate to his government. As an observer of Turkish politics for over 2 decades, an Israeli citizen who has voted for over 3 decades, I would argue that Netanyahu and his supporters have adopted their language from a Turkish textbook of sorts in order to polarize Israeli society, much like Erdogan. Indeed, within the anti-Netanyahu bloc, many have come to call him a mini Erdogan. In today's talk, I will compare Turkey and Israel, first by placing them in a historical context, focusing on the makeup of each state and highlighting their similarities and differences. Special attention will be paid to the Turkish and Israeli societies, both of which have a politically divided ethnic majority, united against a prevalent ethnic minority. I will then discuss ties between the 2 countries and the future of their relations, with Erdogan and Netanyahu holding a tete-a-tete for the first time just 2 weeks ago. Finally, I will address the question that is posed on the flyer: how these polarized democracies fit in with the larger question, both of global democracy and of a regional security environment complicated by the emergence of new powers that, for the first time, could challenge Turkey and Israel's role as the leading 2 powers in the region. To grasp the similarities in Israel and Turkey's ethnic makeup, it is necessary to revisit Israeli history, which, like other regional states, should be seen, I say, in its post-Ottoman framework. Many know that the early leaders of the Jewish state, including David Ben-Gurion and Moshe Sheret, studied in Istanbul. Some of their Zionist friends even fought and died while serving in the Ottoman army during the Balkan Wars and the First World War. Few, however, have explored the influence of how these experiences within the Ottoman Empire influenced Zionism and the foundation of the later Jewish state. some may be surprised to learn that before World War I, some Ottoman Jews and Zionist immigrants were hopeful that the Ottoman Empire could become a place where they could develop an autonomous homeland in Palestine. In the post-Young Turk era, Ben Gurion and Shared and others saw the rise of Turkish nationalism up close, and ethnic religious patriotism similar in its exclusivity to what they encountered in Russia. It was also during these years that a particular type of civic nationalism grew in parallel, allowing each group, Turks, Arabs, Armenians, and Greeks, to develop national pride within an Ottoman framework. This created space for both Ottoman Jews and Zionists to secure the communal and national rights that they were seeking. This is something I discussed in great detail in yesterday's talk. The lessons Zionists were taking from the other national movements in the empire were many, but perhaps one of the greatest influence on the future leaders of the Jewish state, I argue, was witnessing the population transfers and engineering of ethnic cleansing. In 1912-1913, their studies in Istanbul, that's Demir Ben Gurion and other Zionists, were cut short due to the mass influx of Muslim refugees from the Balkans who took up shelter there. Later, they watched in horror as Armenians were massacred during World War I, fearing that this could become their fate. Unsurprisingly, Ben Gurion looked at it positively when the British proposed a population exchange between Palestinians and the Jewish population, much like the Greek-Turkish exchange that in 1937. The dynamics between the two national movements, Turkey and the Zionist Jewish state, had their differences, certainly. Still, the leaders of both realized early on the need to obtain an ethnic majority and were set on radically secularizing their populations, resulting in the collective exclusion of large parts of their respective societies. In 1923, Turkey declared itself a republic under the leadership of Mustafa Kemal. A little over a decade later, David Ben Gurion, who was from the same generation, became the leader of the Jewish Yishuv. As I mentioned in a previous article, quote, geographically, historically, and culturally, the first leaders of Turkey and Israel must likely have much more in common than might be presumed at first glance. In fact, it's highly likely that David Ben Gurion, when he secretly met Adnan Menderes in August 1958, that they spoke Turkish with each other. Thus, while Israeli history certainly needs to be examined through a settler colonial lens, much can be gained by considering it through the lens of a post-Ottoman state as well. Not only will doing so help us understand better the dynamics of the Nakba, the 1948 expulsion of a significant portion of the Palestinian population, it will also help identify the similarities between today's Turkey and Israel, and excluding their ethnic minorities within this. For Turkey, the Kurds, and for Israel, the Palestinian citizens of the state. Now I'm going to move to Israel-Turkish relations. Few remember the good days of the late 1990s, when Israel and Turkey's militaries were aligned, with the Oslo Accords providing hope that the intractable conflict between Israel and the Palestinians, who were represented by the PLO, might reach a solution. This was an era that many believed would usher in stable regional peace. Also during these years, Turkey found an ally in some Jewish lobbies in Washington who helped advance its policy of denying the Armenian genocide and counter growing calls to boycott Turkey for its brutal clampdown on Kurds in the wake of the war that raged in the country's Kurdish regions. Israel seized on Turkey's isolation to strengthen its own regional presence, finding a new source for arms sales, military exchanges, and deals to refurbish the Turkish Air Force jets and army tanks. The massive 1999 earthquake that hit Izmit Adapazarı gave Israel a chance to show that its aid was not just a matter of arms, but was something more sincere. This led to a further warming of relations helped by Turkey's admiration for the Israeli soccer player, Chaim Revivo, who played then on the Fenerbahce team. These renewed ties were built on decades of off-and-on relations, which included good times and less good ones, such as the kidnapping and assassination of the Israeli diplomat Ephraim Rome in 1971. Israel has always had to endure a virulent anti-Israel presence in Turkey among the country's leftists and Islamists. The Turkish left maintained ties to the Palestinian resistance movements, while the Islamists produced anti-Semitic conspiracy theories claiming Zionist world dominance. The Turkish population has long been, and I stress still is, sympathetic to the Palestinian cause, which, as we will see, has been treated as a domestic issue by some Turkish politicians, including Erdogan. And so Israel's short-lived popularity came to a screeching halt with the breakout of the Second Intifada, which led then Prime Minister Bülent Ecevit to claim Israel was committing genocide in reference to the Jenin camp military excursion. In 2003, Recep Tayyip Erdogan came to power. Despite rhetoric against Israel's state terror, he maintained that, and this is almost throughout his whole the years he's been in power, he maintained and maintains that, quote, ties between the people of Turkey and the people of Israel remain strong between the two peoples, not necessarily between the two countries. Erdogan also believed that he could serve as a mediator between the Palestinians and Israel at that time, an offer he presented during his only state visit to Israel in 2005. At this point, Israel saw its stance on the Palestinian front as a hindrance, as would be expected with Ariel Sharon as the head of state. Only during Ehud Olmert's tenure did Erdogan fulfill his ambition, playing a crucial role in brokering an Israeli-Syrian agreement that ultimately collapsed with Israel's invasion of Gaza in January 2009. Now moving to my next section, military ties to economic ones, the tense Netanyahu-Erdogan years, 2009 to 2018. The political relationship between Turkey and Israel began an accelerated decline in 2009. This was captured in a microcosm when Erdogan lashed out at Shimon Peres during the Davos World Economic Forum, shouting 1 minute at the president. Erdogan soon realized that the more vocally he criticized Israel, the more popularity he gained at home and with the Islamic world at large. After the killing of 8 Turkish activists on the Mavi Marmara, a Turkish ship taking part in the Gaza flotilla, Israel and Turkey entered a crisis period. Though politically, ties were soaring, ties were souring, a new dynamic emerged to counter this. The two countries began fixing their relations on trade, which jumped leaps and bounds to almost $10 billion in 2015, and continues to remain at an impressive level. By separating politics from trade, Turkey's informal policy with numerous countries, Erdogan has been able to have his cake and eat it too, gaining political capital by appearing defiant, even as he ensures an influx of foreign capital. This can also be seen in the expansion of Turkish Airlines within the Israeli sphere. During the same years, no matter how bad the days were, it kept flying to Israel, bringing Israelis and tourists via Istanbul to numerous cities throughout the world, becoming second to El Al for numerous years. So I still, later on we can talk in questions more about this, but I still remember 3 days after Mavi Marmara, I get on the plane completely empty. Still 5 planes were going daily. They weren't canceling a single flight, or very, very few, if any. Another major shift in regional dynamics made Turkey more reliant on Israel in the post-2013 era. After miscalculating the ability of Egyptian leader Mohamed Morsi to stay in power, and Erdogan's erroneous gamble that Bashar al-Assad would eventually lose the Syrian civil war, which would have led to a pro-Turkish conservative Sunni government in the country, Turkey found itself increasingly isolated. Though Erdogan continued to rise as one of the few vocal supporters of Palestinians, this was monitored by Israel and cautiously allowed. The two countries finally reconciled in 2016. Netanyahu's steadfastness not to give in to Turkish demands concerning reconciliation for the Mavi Marmara affair led Turkey to court Israel and to agree to a deal much more favorable to the Israelis. The Turkish government dropped its demand that Israel lift its blockade on Gaza, for example. In return, Turkey would be permitted to supply humanitarian aid to Gaza and to pursue plans to supply electricity to the Strip, plans that were never realized. More importantly, Israel received the guarantees that court cases against the Israeli military personnel who took part in the Mavi Marmara incident would be closed. In short, Netanyahu held strong for 6 years. He and he alone wrote the script for the country's relations. Israel's regional natural gas agreements with Egypt, Jordan, Cyprus, and Greece, among others, and the development of open ties with United Arab Emirates, Morocco, and Bahrain has also led to better relations between Israel and Turkey. It became abundantly clear that it was in Turkey's interest to continue the path of reconciliation, which would also improve its regional place in the new order emerging. For those who thought that the joint government of Naftali Bennett and Yair Lapid, who had both ridiculed Netanyahu as a wannabe Erdogan, if they thought this would sour the relations, once in power they seized the moment to progress ties between the two countries, something that was aided by the president, Isaac Herzog, himself a fan of Turkey. It quickly became apparent to them that Turkey's overtures were too strong to look the other way. This is to Naftali Bennett and Yair Lapid. By then, Turkey had submitted a new beginning with the UAE, and very importantly with Saudi Arabia, and was working on relations with Egypt, something that really hasn't come out to fruition yet. Also then, Turkish intelligence proved successful in protecting Israelis threatened by terror plots, and during Lapid's visit to Ankara to meet Erdogan, he also met privately with Hakan Fidan, which I thought in itself is interesting. The then now foreign minister, but then the head of the Turkish intelligence. Presumably, Turkey also has developed a much more direct role in pressuring Hamas to resort to containment, following its successful showing in 2021, in which it forced Israel into a full-scale onslaught. And now I'm coming to my last section. It's called Maintaining political hegemony in Turkey and Israel. Today, political scientists, historians, and citizens of Turkey argue over the essential question of whether Turkey can be declared a democracy. And if so, what that means when Erdogan and his associates yield hegemonic power over all realms of government administration and within much of the public and even private spheres. Even as the question remains unanswered, we saw last June, when Erdogan barely eked out an electoral win, that elections do matter. This made clear by the victories this made clear that victories by Erdogan and the AKPs have more to do at times with opposition's ineptitude, even if the realm of municipalities, the opposition has shown resilience. Of course, in 2019, taking Istanbul, Izmir, 5 major municipalities. As in the Turkish and Israeli cases, this may have more to do with the inability of the center and center-left parties to transcend the national ethos written in the DNA of each country. In Turkey, the opposition CHP adheres to a doctrine of secular Kemalism that includes more religious members, that excludes more religious members of the population. This only solidifies the impression that the AKP voters have of the CHP as unfair to their communities, similar to the sense that many Israeli voters have concerning the secular left, center, and center-left parties. However, the Turkish case is different from Israel in that is different than Israel in that over the years the CHP has been able to rehabilitate itself, something that the Israeli Labor Party has not succeeded in doing. During the discussion after, we can perhaps look how the ideologies of Kemalism and Zionism have shifted over the years and ponder what this means for each country. The situation in both countries becomes much more complicated when you consider the ethnic makeup of each state. Both Turkey and Israel are ethnic nation states that give preference to the dominant identity over a universal sense of citizenship. In order to integrate into the national polity, Kurdish citizens of Turkey must subordinate aspects of their ethnic identity to conform with Turkishness. This is most evident when it comes to the issue of language, particularly in the public sphere. For most of the Republic's history, it has been forbidden to register Kurdish names, for example. At certain points in time, speaking Kurdish outside the home has been banned. Unlike in Israel, where the first language of study for Palestinian citizens is Arabic, Kurdish has never been taught in public schools, though Kurdish activists have demanded it for decades. The current government has continued to staunchly oppose Kurdish language instruction. In the Turkish constitution, all citizens are defined as Turks. Erdogan has made no move to changes in the 20 years in office, despite hopes that he might have done this in the beginning of the tenure as prime minister, when bans on speaking Kurdish in the public sphere were lifted by the AKP government, as it implemented reforms to meet conditions for European Union membership. Although the Israeli Declaration of Independence calls on Arab citizens to participate in the state's institutions and promises them equal citizenship, they have long been subjected to legal discrimination. The nation-state law enacted in 2018 reinforces this discrimination, recognizing the Jewish people as a sole group that possess national ties to the land. While the AKP has made attempts to integrate Kurds, for example, citizens of Kurdish origin can make it to the top echelons of the state. Anyone that steps out of line risks being accused of supporting terror. See the many HDP members jailed and numerous mayors ousted from their office and imprisoned. In the Israeli case, the Arab population faces the greatest threat of losing their rights if the Netanyahu government does succeed in passing the judicial reform. However, and this is key to our conversation, the two main opposition parties also systematically exclude ethnic minorities. Thus, Arab citizens' struggle for democracy is more limited. What we have not yet addressed is the fact that Israel controls the lives of millions of non-citizen Palestinians directly in the West Bank and indirectly in Gaza. In short, the very idea of either Turkey or Israel being thriving democracies falls flat on the head when you look at the exclusion of their ethnic minorities with the ethnic minorities. With Israeli democracy even more precarious when taking into consideration the ongoing 56 years of the occupation of Palestinian territory. So what does this mean for the future of the two countries and the region at large? Unfortunately, the futures of Turkey and Israel as strong democratic states seem bleak. First and foremost, the source of Turkey's authoritarianism is certainly not Erdogan or his AKP party. Rather, it cannot be disconnected from the history of coups d'etats and the 1990s war with the Kurds that left tens of thousands of people dead. While Turkey is certainly not a settler colonial state, ethnic cleansing was inherent to its foundation. This was not unique to Turkey. The post-Ottoman order created such states as Iraq, Syria, Lebanon, that have not solved the balance of power even now. As for Israel, it has been propped up as a democracy for years. However, with the ongoing occupation of the West Bank and shrinking space that the Arab citizens of the state are entitled to, the current political stalemate is a sign that if democracy is to be given a chance, it, like Turkey, will need to recess the essence of the state. In closing, it would seem that the two countries over the years have been propped up by a narrative of being the only democracies in the Middle East in order to serve both the domestic and international narrative. The Israelis taking the streets, who have placed a great deal of energy in turning towards the United States as a power that will pressure the Netanyahu government, should look to their Turkish counterparts, who have seen the European Union and the United States place economic and security issues over democratic freedoms within the country, which at times could be seen as not much more than window dressing vis-a-vis EU, vis-a-vis Turkey, and their demands of freedoms and so forth. On the flip side, even with Erdogan and his government gaining such powers, the Turkish case can also provide hope that due to the longevity of the state as a relative democracy, any leader trying to assert powers will always be faced with constant scrutiny and resistance. Certainly, Turkey is not Russia, and there is a great deal of give and take between citizens demanding their rights and a government uninterested or even hostile to their demands. So the last thing I didn't write here, and I'll go ahead and end, is we can later on ponder this idea of where this is going to bring us. I think in the last in August, I had jotted down somewhere means on Twitter. I had tweeted out that the US waiver program and the deal with Saudi Arabia between Israel is going to trump the democratic protests. And we saw this hold true in Washington when Netanyahu came. A big, Netanyahu got the best victory he could ask for. Israelis receiving visa-free travelers, nearly visa-free travel to the United States. And really, we see that there is a chance that relations between Saudi Arabia and Israel are very close. Some are predicting, we're going to have to wait and see. And this is definitely would be a blow to the protests in general, because it does undermine, it throws them off 180 degrees. So we'll have to see what happens in the next few months. But I think it's almost inevitable. I think it's almost inevitable and unstoppable now. And I really think that we're seeing perhaps a new turn in the United States, where it's not even going to give lip service to democratic freedoms, whether it's going to cut deals and deals that are in their interest. And that actually should be expected. That's what has been the status quo actually for years. So I'll stop there, and thanks everyone for listening.
Okay, just let me know if you have any questions. But I could just start.
Yes.
Yeah, so thank you so much for this talk. I think together with yesterday's talk, we have like this, a century-long trajectory of these relationships. And I really appreciate the way you're talking about domestic politics in relation to foreign policy and geopolitical issues. That I really appreciate. My question is more about the domestic politics and especially the party politics. I mean, as we see in Turkey and Israel, I think both Netanyahu and Erdogan,
as they weaken electorally, they try to cooperate with more fringe parties, which exacerbate the polarization and disrupts potential for any democratization.
Absolutely, yeah.
So can you reflect on that party politics aspect of it, with regard to, especially like you sort of draw this as Turkey being the forebearer of these anti-democratic developments, and then Israel kind of following from behind, especially with this constitutional overhaul of the judiciary and that attempt. So in terms of when you think of the party politics, where do they stand?
First of all, that's a great question. It'll take me about 2 or 3 minutes to answer it. I think it's very, very important. First of all, I think generally speaking, we can add to an extent the United States in this picture with Trump. And I've been calling it scraping the pot. The more these people become desperate for votes, of course, the US system is not a democratic in the sense that the majority doesn't count, right? It's electoral college. So the more you have to scrape the pot to get more support, you're going to the fringe parties, as you mentioned. Ben-Gvir for years was denied recognition by the Likud. Even Netanyahu wouldn't stand with Ben-Gvir during the elections. Today, I mean, he's convicted for incitement of terror and numerous other things. It's someone that, like I said, has voted for 30 years. To imagine that Ben-Gvir is in charge of the police force is beyond comprehension. It's dangerous, and we're seeing the huge price that we had said that the Arabs will pay first for these more fascist, more turn. We see the violence in the Arab communities, the Palestinian citizens of Israel. It's up to 200 this year. People dead in internal fighting, and the police completely inept about what to do with it. It's not chance that he's this. On the Turkish side, we see here in the US that the white nationalists for years wouldn't vote. They say Republicans and the Democrats are all the same. Why would we vote, right? This is sort of the idea. Hezbollah and the radical or more the Kurdish groups that were legitimized by creating election coalitions this time, for years would say, well, they don't represent us anyways, not this or not that. And by recognizing these communities, they got 2 or 3% of the vote, whether it's Ben-Gvir, whether it's white nationalists here in the United States, or whether it's this. The problem is once they get some recognition, you can't take it back, and they grow. In all polling, the good news is that Ben-Gvir is not really polling that great if there were no elections, but we have to get to new elections to see how this is going to play out. Now, coming directly to your question, I think the interesting thing about Israel and Turkey is the threshold. For years, it was 10% threshold to keep Kurds out. And once they passed that in the mostly Kurdish party, together with leftist groups, which I've written extensively on how Israeli left should look at the HDP, the HDP party, as a model of bringing in a more united front of model Jews and Arabs in Israel, like mostly Kurds, but also a great number of Turkish. Once they passed that 10% threshold, there was no controversy that it would be brought down. And then Erdogan himself needed to bring it down to 7% for the party that's in coalition with him, then the ultra-nationalist party, the MHP. So we have an interesting phenomenon here that for years, the JHP and Turkey is inherently a parliamentary system. It's built to be a multi-party system also, very much like Israel. But because of the high threshold, the CHP was able to rehabilitate itself. It was the only party that got in 1990, in 2002. Remember the 2002 elections, 50% of the vote was thrown out. Numerous parties got 9% and they were thrown out. So this created a dynamic which actually Erdogan wanted, right? This two-party system. He's always trying to get this two-party system. And in a two-party system, the JHP or the CHP opposition never can get that amount that Erdogan did. It's impossible. We have E party now, we have CHP party. So that's on one issue. So yes, the opposition rehabilitated itself enough to get the municipalities, but it wasn't enough to get the elections right now. And we know that the party politics the elections was very party based this time. with Kilicdaroglu insisting that he'd be the one, and it wasn't perhaps the more popular one, Imamoglu, which we'll never know what will happen. On the Israeli side, you have that low threshold that was made higher in order to push the Arab parties out. It was done. It was brought up to 3.25% or 3.5% in 2015 by Lieberman, Victor Lieberman. He passes this idea of he's insisting that they don't want this. And then what did the Arab parties do? The Arab parties, together with the Jewish Arab Party, Hadash, Communist Party, they create the joint list and they get 13 seats. But once you get 13 seats and you have the opposition saying, we'll never sit with them because they're like for the center left, they're like for the most right, most of Turkey leans towards the right. They say, we'll never sit with the Kurds. Most Israelis say, we'll never sit with the Arabs. And of course, this was broke for the first time because Lapid and Bennett realized that without them, they cannot get a majority of them. So they're constantly juggling how to do this. In the meantime, Netanyahu, like Erdogan did and like others did, turned towards the far right, legitimized them, gave them a place in the sun, and saved them. And really, without these parties, he would be unable to. The country would still be in crisis. So I hope I answered your question. That it has a lot to do with the, I think, governing powers giving one way, the opposition running after them to correct themselves, getting some kind of strength, but not giving voices to other groups also. So, I mean, the Israeli left is just in shambles now. I mean, Meretz didn't get in. Labour Party is now at 2 seats. You have a personal party of Yair Lapid. It's interesting, but it's a personal party based on Yair Lapid. And then you have this Gantz's, which is a makeup of many former Likud people and security people. So we have to see. They're polling very high. So Israel could go back the other way. In Turkish case, this is impossible. With the presidential system, this is impossible. Okay, so I hope I answered that question.
Thank you very much. My name is Amichai Magen. I'm a visiting professor from Israel here at the FSI, together with Professor Ori Rabinovich, kind of inaugural fellows in Israel studies here. So, merhaba. And I'm an Israeli Turkophile. I did my MA on the abolition of the death penalty in Turkey, so I spent a lot of time. And I think that comparing the two societies and political systems is always very rich and very, very rewarding. And you mentioned many kind of little-known historical parallels, etc. One more that I think is really important is the influence of the Ottoman Melek system on the Israeli legal system, which is still very much in influence in Israel. I was going to ask you a question exactly about the electoral threshold and the differences there. Let me just mention that the electoral threshold in Israel was raised twice in Israel's history.
Yes, I know.
It started off as 1%, as you know.
Yes.
It was 1% of the popular vote between 1948 and 1992. Then it was raised to 2%. And in 2015, it was raised to 3.25%.
3.25, yeah, I said that.
Lieberman wanted to raise it to 5%. That was blocked by Moshe Kahlon and Kulanu, and eventually it was decided on 3.25 because of the fear that the Israeli Arab parties will not cross the electoral.
Exactly, but the motivation to do this,
yes,
by Lieberman was to get out. Was Zouabi, Hanin Zouabi, and to get out. This was the motivation.
Man is a serial political opportunist, as we know, and he changes the.
I don't think he's a political opportunist, but that's you that you said that. Yeah,
I think he's very much political opportunist.
I think he's a Putin operative.
Perhaps he's a very smart one. He's a very smart one that's been managed for years. Every politician is opportunist. I mean, I don't think he's different than many other parties, whatever the case.
Let's put that aside. But I think your last sentence that this could split very, very quickly in Israel in the way that it cannot is very apt and very interesting. I want to ask you about a different aspect to this phenomenon that I think is really, really interesting. So in the Israeli case at the moment, we have the emergence of potential veto players that are very interesting. pro-democracy veto players.
Mhm.
You look at the former heads of the security establishment, you look at fighter pilots, you look at high-tech entrepreneurs,
Mhm.
and their message is, our social contract is with a democracy. If Israel ceases to be a democracy, the social contract is broken, and we will no longer volunteer for military service. Israeli high-tech entrepreneurs are saying, if you continue down this path, the next startup company that we build is not going to be in Tel Aviv, it's going to be we're going to register it in Delaware, etc. Is there something similar in Turkish society? Maybe this is also a question for Aisha. Do we have kind of pro-democracy? This is also very relevant for Hungary, I think, as well. We have Janka, I'm sorry, yes. So it's very interesting, this phenomena of sort of pro-democracy veto players, or at least very small groups of people that can have a disproportionate influence on democracy. Is there something similar in Turkey? And how do you think about this phenomena?
So the phenomenon, the only comparison that I can think of at the very beginning of when the military people said we're not going to serve and we're not going to go, is that people on the Israeli right started saying this is a military coup. They said that over and over again. 3 or 4 people, they said it. It was quieted down. There is that feeling that they can't have their cake and eat it, meaning the military people suddenly say, wait a minute, we're not happy with this government. It was a huge debate. It was, so that I think that's the idea that this the military establishment in Israel is overall, center, I would say. They've created this idea that they're leftists or something like this. That's something different. In the Turkish case, this is an Israeli case. I think part of the problem is, yes, the high tech is very influential, but Netanyahu's success is in the economic realm that he was able to make the conflict manageable and to create a place where 80% or 90% of Israelis are happy to be in Israel, right? If you do polls over and over and over, most Israelis are very happy to be in Israel. You have this idea of the EU opening up with visa-free travel years and years ago. You have America now. They're not leaving in masses to work illegally in the United States like they were in the 70s or 80s.
Israel's the 4th happiest country in the world.
That's what I'm going to say. It's one of the most happiest.
But the data collection was done for the election.
Exactly.
It's going to change.
Exactly. But already in the 90s, a lot of the Israeli companies started expanding outside of the country itself. They started investing in, whether it's different, I know less about this, but whether it was Aroma Coffee that opened up all over Canada, whether it's Max Brenner that opened up all over the world, right? Whether it's people, my daughter grew up in Renana, right? So whether it's people that are working in Africa part-time, in Israel part-time, the French and Jewish people that go back and forth. And so Israel is already, I think that the idea of business, that if you want to do business, it's outside of Israel, that already existed. Now, of course, high tech, that was a major, it would affect the economy in a major way. And we see that the shekel is now 3.85, which you start seeing that sliding of the shekel, very, very much similar to the way you saw the slide of the Turkish lira sometimes when you had non-democratic steps being taken. This is before the complete loss before lost everything. So that is interesting. In Turkey, as far as I know, the society, very similar to the Israeli society, is so divided over sectarian groups, whether religious, secular, middle class, lower class, upper class, that it's very hard to imagine any pressure group that could do what the Israeli military is doing now, which is it's pretty impressive. The Milumimnikim that are saying we're not going to go serve, and they're saying, well, you're traitors. They said, no, this is a social contract. Which is interesting that there was never really a law that you have to go to Miluim. Apparently, you have to go to reserves. That that you're just doing it because it's your part of your social contract, and people pay your salary when you go. And professors. I finished university there. We'd have professors that would disappear for 2 or 3 weeks, and they would be in the army, and they would come back, right? So you don't have anything like this in, as far as I know, in Turkey. Most of the major groups that you think that might have been these pressure points collapsed or moved towards the state very quickly. This is the media, and that's why the media reforms in Israel is very worrying, right? What's his name again? I forgot his name. Yeah, exactly. So that's why it's very, very worrying if that were to happen. But media in Turkey completely collapsed very, very quickly. Banks completely gave up and said, we're moving towards a sphere of pleasing the government at least, or trying to work with them.
But also in Turkey, business elites and industrialists also aligned with Erdogan. That's a warning to Israel.
They were a bit hesitant the first couple of years, and it worked only for so long. Exactly. So I think that's why I say I think in the Israeli case, when push comes to shove, it's going to be very difficult to keep the momentum here, but that's what we're going to have to see. No one's going to. I mean, it's impressive. I think what country, and I want to say that a lot of Turkish people look at the Israeli protesters with pride and say, "Wow, look at them. They're doing what we should have done." And I think that's something I was a bit, I get carried away sometimes, a bit too critical. And I said, wait a minute, there's something right here. This is not Gezi Park, but this is something unique that I don't think we've ever seen anywhere in the world where this many people every week go out and have their voice heard. So it also speaks volumes.
Well, in Poland and Hungary also.
Absolutely, yeah.
Ali?
Thank you so much, Louis, for this amazing conversation. I have two questions. One is about history and one is about current politics. So I've been thinking about, the comparison you made between Israel and Turkey and the original story, basically, like the population exchange. So I have been also thinking that way for a while now, and I see Israel as like a project that tried to replicate what happened with Turkey, with Greeks, and also with partition India between Muslims and Hindus. So can we call Israel as what Israel did as a failed partition project or failed population exchange project? That is one question that I want to raise. Another one is about the current politics. So you compare Turkey and Israel in ways that many people don't do. Currently, now it has become a fashionable catchphrase, but the populism thing. And Turkey is many times also about the media, how media was basically taken over by Erdogan cronies or proxies. The idea is Turkey is generally compared with the East European countries, the Balkan countries, and some other populous countries like in India. Do you see the use of populist discourse in similar ways between Netanyahu and Erdogan, and also including in that the religious populist discourse? Do you see this populism there?
I mean, the difference, and this is back to the original question that you asked me, is that the Israeli society is the Turkish society. When you say right, or when you have this religious nationalism, AKP merging with the MHP, the different types of nationalisms. I mean, Israel has what they say in Hebrew, Haredim, the ultra-religious Orthodox parties, right? That actually they're very different in that framework to make it the same as these populists. So when I'm saying that the populist cause by Netanyahu really only goes so far, because it's only to a very specific group within the constituency of the right wing that buy into this, right? So I think that's something important. So when this idea that still saying that we were all the Mizrahi Jews were all oppressed by the Labor Party, and that resonates to a small group. It used to resonate much, much more. On the other hand, you have these other groups, and that's why I said they're supporting Netanyahu out of their disdain of the Israeli courts, meaning they're not actually at all with Netanyahu on these reforms. That's the religious parties. They're not with him on these reforms. They're in it to get what they need from it, right? And that's it. And once they get what they need, then that's going to be that's a little different in this case. And so that's the first thing. The second question about the partition failed. I mean, every partition state is failed to a great extent, right? Think about that, right? Every state that was India and Pakistan, Turkey and Greece, 100 years of tensions and relations, and look at unfortunately Karabakh now, right? We have any of these post-Ottoman states. That's why I say they're not solved. Lebanon is not. Certainly, the Syrian civil war was directly connected to French mandate politics that led to the rise of certain groups against other groups. So what we're seeing is that we really are seeing the continuation of what happened in the post-Ottoman era, right? Now, in history, we can't say, what if the Ottomans would have ruled on for another 100 years? Who knows what, if these would have arisen in the same way? No, they wouldn't have in the same way. Would there be divisions? There would be divisions. There were divisions then also. So that the idea that, yes, Israel is a failed state in a sense, I think Israel, you know what? I've been teaching for years, and I say it very cautiously, but I can imagine Israel in 30 years from now being very similar, not in terms of civil war, taking up arms, right? But some people have even explored that idea of being a state that each constituency just watching out for their own good, okay? And they're not connected in any ways. And, you have Tel Aviv, I always look at Beirut property before the explosion in the very hard days. You could have a civil war in Syria 80 miles away, but you still have property going for $1 million. And it's whether insurance companies are going to cover it or they're not going to cover it. So you could see Tel Aviv as a booming city, and then you could see fighting happening, a total breakdown of calm or security in the West Bank, right? And the two act together like Gaza right now in this. So this idea is, what is this? So every state in that sense is a failed state, but Turkey and Israel have been the longest, together with Jordan, you could argue Saudi Arabia, and this, we didn't talk about the longevity. I mentioned the longevity of these states, right? The longevity of creating a democratic system that did not serve everyone. I have to say that, right? The democratic system never served the ethnic minorities at all. But the fact that they had these democratic-like nations for so long, it takes them that long to erode the freedoms. And that's why I said the hope, because even in Turkey, we see that resistance groups keep resisting. They don't stop, and they keep on pressuring the state. So I think that in that sense, we might have failed states, but what are successful states? Also, I mean, we could argue, is the US?
No, in terms of basically expunging, the populations, Turkey basically expelled all the Greeks, and Pakistan expelled most of the Hindus.
Yeah, Turkey, remember, said, I forget who said in the parliament, that said during the population exchange, said, oh wow, it was so great that the Greeks offered to us. They told us what we never could say. So yeah.
Any other questions?
What do you think the two opposition groups should and could learn from each other?
The thing that they should learn is towards the end, that if they want to create a viable future, they're going to have to create alliances with the ethnic minority. It's inevitable. The Israeli state today, the amount of the opposition who is, yes, they are the largest of all the groups, right? This idea of really, I think if you look at the bringing 500,000 people out every week, or 2,000 to 500,000, 400,000 people, right? Meaning among all the groups, they are the secular Israelis, you could say, or also many of them are, you have some religious people in there, of course, also. They create sort of this core of what Israel is and Israeliness is and stuff like that. They have that legacy. I want to say, for example, Kemalism, and we see how it's been rehabilitated. And that has led to more problems actually to move forward. That's led, that strength of going back and holding on to Mustafa Kemal as a pillar of your own identity hinders your way forward of creating new bridges with the ethnic minority. So over long term, secular people are going to have to make ties with other secular people within that ethnic minority and try to create something different. I don't see it's possible even right now, right? I
think it's possible to imagine a secular Jewish Arab party that's open to Zionist, non-Zionist, and a-Zionists.
Absolutely.
Has been talking about it for years.
Yeah, I believe this is personally the path I've taken for years now. And in terms of my own party politics, I write about what I vote for, everything. This is but the question is exactly how do you get there, right? And I don't think they found, especially in these recent protests, that they found the path. Although the anti-occupation forces have, remember the first few weeks of the protest?
Growing exponentially.
Yeah, they were being thrown out, and now they have their little place. They're there, and they're you hear their voices, and that's something that you see over time. And we know with the Turkish case, with the HDP, they really got a strong core of Turkish people voting for them. But when that clampdown came from above, that also influences. The more gelling that you do of the ethnic minority, the more hesitant that majority is to go with them, actually. It's the opposite. Wow, there must be some reason that Demirtas is gelled. There must be some reason that even the Turkish people are gelled, that Osman Kavala is there, right? The more people, the longer they're there, the more you put out that is. So, but yeah, that's what I would say. And I've written 2 or 3 articles since 2015 on this topic of having to open up to look at the Turkish case. The Turkish case was very viable for Israel for a couple of years. Today it isn't. Today the HDP is really struggling for a path forward. And what that path is going to look like is very different than it was in 2013 post-Gezi. Yeah.
But also the last elections put Turkey in a very different place then.
Absolutely.
So it's not that just the opposition, but also the government has different means and
exactly. And this is the one reason that when I'm writing, I'm putting often Erdogan and his associates and his allies, because the AKP is not the same AKP that when I was editing some papers, and everyone's AKP. And I said, no, it's not the same thing anymore. It's a very different party. Like Likud today is a very different party, right? Likud, you look at half the people that are speakers in the protests are former Likud people. And they're saying, they've taken over our party. They've hijacked. And then once again, it's like Republican Party here.
There's the history of Likud flowing up into parties. Without Ariel Sharon.
Yeah, exactly.
History.
A party that doesn't have a platform is not likely to agree on its principles.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah.
I think the picture with Israeli Arabs is more nuanced. Not only do you have the case of Mansour Abbas and the president that was created in the previous government of an Israeli Arab Islamist party, Ram, being a member of the governing coalition, although for a year and a bit, but that really broke it up.
Very important.
And today you have 2 new parties. I was just reading about this a few days ago. 2 new civil society movements of Jews and Arabs forming political parties to run in the next elections because they see a space. They see a space. Ironically, because so much of the center has been taken by Kahol Lavan, by Benny Gantz and Gidon. So the center is very crowded now. But if you look, and the old Israeli left is dead. I completely agree with you on that. And so people identify a political space political entrepreneurs identify a space in new Arab Jewish political movements, which is very, very interesting. I have a very good friend who's a linguist at Tel Aviv University who studies patterns of speech among Israeli Arabs. And he tells this fascinating story of a generation of young Israelis who are whose mode of Arabic is so deeply influenced by Hebrew that it's almost like a new dialect that is developing. If you look at the number of Israeli Arab women who go to university since 2000, it's really skyrocketed. So you look at entrepreneurship in Nazareth and the Galilee, etc., and Haifa, it's also flowering. So there's also just a very big urban-rural divide among Israeli Arabs, right? So it's very nuanced.
Yeah,
But this particular government is doing everything it can to alienate this.
Question, how painful will the backlash be to this government, or how successful?
Yes, how
depending on
successful
where you
the
see.
backlash.
yeah.
Maybe we should wrap up and then we can continue.
Yeah, exactly, yeah.
I would like to thank you for all the talks, right? And this
Thanks for having me. It's
discussion.
been a
Thank you so much
pleasure.
for
It's been really
coming.
great. Thanks so much for coming, everyone.
Thank you.
Okay.
Bye.